June 5, 2000. The city of Kisangani, Democratic Republic of Congo. Two armies that entered this country as allies are now pointing artillery at each other across the streets of a city of 600,000 people. Not Congolese armies. Rwandan and Ugandan forces, two governments that invaded this country together 2 years ago, ostensibly to protect their borders, are now shelling residential neighborhoods with 120mm mortars and tank fire because both of them want the same thing, and there is only one place on earth to get it. They are not fighting over oil, not over gold, not over diamonds, not over ideology, not over ethnicity. They are fighting over a river bend. Specifically, the precise point on the Congo River where the water stops being navigable, where 1,734 kilometers of open waterway from Kinshasa ends in a thundering cascade of 7 cataracts, and everything beyond must move by road or not move at all. Kisangani is the last port, the end of the river highway, and in a country the size of Western Europe with almost no functional roads, no railways worth speaking of, and a jungle so thick it swallowed colonial expeditions whole, whoever holds that river bend holds the interior of a continent. The 6-day battle left over 1,000 civilians dead, shrapnel in the walls of the city's cathedral, a UN Security Council resolution demanding withdrawal that neither army respected. And this is where we start, at the end, because to understand how a river bend in Central Africa caused the deadliest war since World War II, you have to rewind to the beginning. All the way to the beginning, the Congo River is not merely a river, it is the circulatory system of a continent, 4,700 kilometers long, the second longest in Africa after the Nile, the world's deepest river, dropping past 220 meters at its lowest point, carrying so much water that its discharge into the Atlantic creates a freshwater plume visible from orbit, a brown stain in the blue ocean that extends 60 kilometers out to sea. Its drainage basin covers 3.7 million square kilometers, larger than India, and crossing it, through the second largest tropical rainforest on Earth, it forms what geographers call the only navigable inland waterway network of its scale anywhere in Africa. 9,000 miles of navigable water, 9,000 miles of natural highway through terrain that would otherwise be impenetrable, in a continent where the geography, as this channel has documented, systematically denies access to its interior through waterfalls, cataracts, and plateau escarpments. The Congo River is an anomaly of staggering strategic importance. Most of Africa's great rivers cannot be navigated inland. The Congo can. For most of its length, from Kisangani to Kinshasa, it is open, calm, and deep enough for barges, ferries, and cargo vessels. That navigability made the river the only reason colonialism was possible in Central Africa. Henry Morton Stanley understood this. In 1883, when he established a colonial trading outpost at the furthest navigable point upstream, the point where the Boyoma Falls, 7 cataracts stretching over 100 kilometers, finally ended and flat water began, he named it Stanleyville. It would become Kisangani. And its geographic logic was brutally simple. It was the transshipment point between the river and the interior. The last place where cargo moving up from the coast could travel by water. After Kisangani, everything had to go by road. In a country that barely had roads, that made Kisangani the hinge of everything, rewind further, to the moment this river became a fault line rather than a lifeline. In 1994, Rwanda experienced the most concentrated mass killing in recorded history. In 100 days, between 500,000 and 1 million Tutsi and moderate Hutu were slaughtered by a Hutu extremist government using machetes, clubs, and organized military forces. The genocide ended when a Tutsi-led rebel army, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, commanded by Paul Kagame, swept through the country, ended the killing, and took power. But the aftermath detonated across the border. The genocidaires, the militia forces who had carried out the genocide, fled west into Zaire, then still ruled by the decaying kleptocracy of Mobutu Sese Seko, and established bases in the Congolese jungle. From those bases, they mounted cross-border raids back into Rwanda. For the new Rwandan government, this was an existential threat. The people who had tried to exterminate your population were now camped on your neighbor's territory, armed and reorganizing. Rwanda needed to solve a geography problem. The problem was that the solution required invading a country the size of Western Europe with almost no functional infrastructure. A country where the only practical way to move an army from the eastern border to the capital, 1,700 kilometers west, was by river, the river. In 1996, a coalition of Rwandan and Ugandan forces, allied with a Congolese rebel leader named Laurent Desire Kabila, began the First Congo War. Their advance westward followed the only logical route through the jungle, the river corridor. They moved methodically, from the eastern highlands down toward Kisangani, and from there along the Congo's navigable length toward Kinshasa. The geography of the river determined the geography of the war. There was no other way in. Mobutu's army, which had spent 3 decades looting rather than equipping itself, dissolved on contact. Mobutu fled in May 1997. Kabila marched into Kinshasa and declared himself president. Renaming the country the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the geography had delivered a victory. It was about to engineer a betrayal. Kabila was not the leader Rwanda and Uganda wanted. He was the leader they could find, a veteran Marxist rebel, a follower of Lumumba, a man who had been fighting in eastern Congo's forests since the 1960s. Che Guevara had actually visited his camp in 1965 and described him, with diplomatic deflation, as a man who was not the man of the hour. He was also not Rwanda's man. Within months of taking power, Kabila began distancing himself from his Rwandan patrons. He resented the perception, accurate, that Kigali had engineered his rise and that Rwandan officers were effectively running significant portions of his military. He began removing Tutsis from positions of power. He opened back channels to the Hutu militias that Rwanda had invaded the first time to suppress. On July 26, 1998, Kabila ordered all foreign troops out of the Congo. Rwanda and Uganda, which still had thousands of soldiers on Congolese soil, viewed this as a direct threat. 9 days later, on August 2nd, the Second Congo War began. Here is the moment where geography becomes fate. Rwanda's military commander, General James Kabarebe, a man who had orchestrated the First Congo War's advance, understood something about the DRC that most outside observers did not. The country was not a country in any conventional military sense. It was a river system, an interconnected network of waterways through a continent-scale jungle, with population concentrated along the water, almost nothing functioning in between. To control the DRC, you did not need to hold territory in the European sense. You needed to control the river. Kabarebe's opening move was one of the most audacious military operations in post-colonial African history. He commandeered 3 planes, loaded them with Rwandan special forces, and flew them to Kitona, a government military base on the Atlantic coast, near the mouth of the Congo River, on the opposite end of the country from Rwanda's eastern border. In one day, without a single overland march, his forces were suddenly positioned at the river's mouth, threatening Kinshasa from the west while rebellion broke out in the east simultaneously. Within 13 days of the war's start, Rwandan-backed rebels held the Inga hydroelectric dam, the facility that provided electricity to Kinshasa and 2 large parts of the Congo, and the port of Adi, through which most of the capital's food arrived by ship. Kinshasa, a city of millions, was suddenly without reliable power or food imports. Think about what this means strategically. Kabarebe did not need to conquer Kinshasa. He needed to hold the river's infrastructure, the dam, the port, the transit points, and the city would come to him. Geography, once again, was the weapon. Not guns, not territory, water. Kinshasa was only saved because Angola, Zimbabwe, and Namibia intervened militarily on Kabila's behalf, pushing the rebel forces back from the Inga Dam and stabilizing the capital. The war then fractured into its second phase, a grinding, multi-year conflict in which the country was effectively divided along the river, with the government holding the west and rebel groups backed by Rwanda and Uganda controlling most of the east. The Congo River became the front line. For 2 years, from August 1998 to late 2000, the river was divided. Government forces and their allies held the southern and western bank. Rwandan and Ugandan-backed rebels held the northern and eastern. The United Nations documented that commercial ship traffic on the Congo stopped almost entirely for this period. No barges, no ferries, no supply convoys. In a country where the river was the only reliable supply route for vast interior regions, where road transport was either non-existent or subject to constant attack, the blockade of the river was not a military inconvenience, it was a famine mechanism. Massive starvation resulted. Relief agencies could not penetrate the interior. Villages that had depended on river trade for food, medicine, and basic goods were cut off entirely. The International Rescue Committee's mortality surveys, the most systematic attempt to measure the war's human cost, found that the majority of the estimated 5.4 million deaths attributed to the conflict were not caused by bullets or bombs. They were caused by disease and malnutrition in areas cut off from supply routes. Areas cut off, in many cases, by the blockade of a river. The weapon that killed most people in the deadliest African war since World War II was not artillery, it was geography. A river, divided at its strategic midpoint, became the instrument of mass death on a scale that the world barely noticed. Now to Kisangani, and the moment that exposes the true engine driving everything. Rwanda and Uganda had entered this war together. Their public justifications, security threats from Hutu militia bases in eastern Congo, were real, if not the whole story. What was also real, and what the UN Security Council would document exhaustively across multiple reports, was that both armies were simultaneously engaged in systematic mineral extraction from the territory they occupied. Gold, diamonds, timber, coltan. Rwandan and Ugandan forces established mining operations in the areas they controlled. Minerals moved east, across borders, and re-emerged in international markets, labeled, sanitized, and sold. The IMF and World Bank, during the same period, rewarded both Rwanda and Uganda with debt relief packages for improving their economic health. The improvement was partially funded by minerals extracted from a country those armies were occupying. The war within the war was about one thing, the diamond center of Kisangani. Kisangani was not only the furthest navigable point on the Congo, it was the hub through which the northeastern Congo's diamonds, gold, and timber had to flow to reach any market. Whoever held Kisangani held the commercial throat of the eastern interior. Rwanda controlled it. First, Uganda wanted it. In August 1999, their forces clashed in Kisangani for the first time. They clashed again in May 2000. And then, in what became known as the Six-Day War, from June 5th to June 10th of 2000, to countries that had jointly invaded this nation, against a government that was not a direct threat to either of them, turned their guns on each other in the streets of a Congolese city, killing more than 1,000 Congolese civilians in a battle for a river bend that gave access to a navigation highway that gave access to a diamond deposit that had nothing to do with either country's stated reason for being in the Congo in the first place. The geometry of the river had drawn them in. The geometry of the river kept them there. And the geometry of the river determined what they fought over and where they killed. Here is where the myth must be confronted. Because the standard explanation for the Second Congo War in Western media and academic literature is built primarily around ethnicity, the Hutu-Tutsi conflict that began in Rwanda in 1994 and spilled across borders. This explanation is not wrong. The ethnic dimension is real, documented, and important. But it is incomplete in the specific way that most explanations of African conflict are incomplete. It explains the trigger without explaining the trap. The trap is the river. The DRC is the size of Western Europe. It is barely 3,000 kilometers of paved roads, the same road density as an average mid-sized European country, spread across a space 20 times larger. Almost all internal movement of goods, people, and military forces depends on the river and its tributaries. This geographic reality means that whoever enters the Congo, for whatever reason, is immediately captured by the logic of the waterway. You cannot hold the country without holding the river. You cannot supply your forces without the river. You cannot extract resources without the river. You cannot move without the river. Rwanda came for security reasons. Then the river showed them a diamond deposit at the far end of a navigable waterway. Then the extraction logic took over. Then Uganda wanted the same deposit at the same river bend. Then the Six-Day Battle. The ethnicity did not put 600,000 civilians in the crossfire of two foreign armies fighting over a port city. The river did. The ethnicity was the key that unlocked the door. The geography was the room they found themselves trapped in. Every conflict analyst who focuses exclusively on the ethnic or political dimension of the Congo Wars is describing the spark and ignoring the powder magazine. The powder magazine is a 9,000-mile river network in a country the size of a continent with almost no roads. Let the numbers settle without comfort. 5.4 million. The IRC's estimate of total deaths from the Second Congo War and its immediate aftermath. The deadliest conflict since World War II. A number so large it encompasses the entire population of cities like Singapore or Norway. Most of them died not from violence but from hunger and disease, in villages cut off from supply routes, in a country where the supply routes were a river, and the river was a front line. 9 countries directly involved. 25 armed groups operating simultaneously. A peace agreement signed in 2002. An official and declared in 2003. and the war that never ended. The eastern Congo, the mineral-rich highlands near the Rwandan and Ugandan borders, near the rivers that flow from the interior to the navigable waterway system, has not experienced peace since 1996. The M23 rebel group, backed by Rwanda by virtually every serious analysis, controls territory in North Kivu today. Goma, the eastern Congo's largest city, fell to M23 in early 2025. 7,000 civilians died. 2 million people displaced. In 2026, the same geographic logic that drove the Second Congo War continues to operate. The river still flows. The minerals are still at the end of it. The eastern highlands are still the access point between Rwanda's sphere of influence and the Congolese interior. No political settlement has changed the geography. No peace treaty has moved the Boyoma Falls. What remains is not a story with a resolution. It is a story with a mechanism, a geographic mechanism that has been running continuously for 30 years and shows no sign of stopping. The Congo River created the possibility of civilization in the Central African interior. It was the only way in, the only way to build trade networks, the only way to move goods and people across a continent-scale jungle. In doing so, it also created a single point of strategic leverage that every power entering the region, Belgian colonizers, Cold War proxy armies, Rwandan and Ugandan forces, mineral extraction corporations, has competed to control. The river did not cause the genocide in Rwanda, but the river shaped what the aftermath of that genocide became. It defined the invasion routes, the supply lines, the strategic objectives, and the commercial prizes. It drew 9 countries into a single conflict. It divided into a front line and became a starvation weapon. And at its furthest navigable point, where the cataracts begin and the road takes over, it concentrated enough strategic value in one city to cause 2 allied armies to shell each other's troops in a residential neighborhood for 6 days. The dead in Kisangani, the civilians killed by Rwandan and Ugandan artillery in a city neither country had any legitimate claim to be in a war whose official justifications had nothing to do with the city they were fighting over, died because of the geography of water, because of where the river ended and where the diamonds were, because of the specific physical arrangement of the planet that placed a navigable highway next to a mineral deposit at the junction of a jungle that had no roads. No one designed this. Geography did not have a plan. It simply created the conditions. And inside those conditions, every human decision, from Kagama's security calculations to Kabribi's 3-plane gambit to the mining concessions awarded to foreign militaries during the occupation, made perfect geographic sense. That is the most disturbing thing about this story. Not that the war happened, but that given the geography, it was almost impossible for it not to. There is a final detail that closes this investigation without closing the wound. When the first commercial barge reached Kisangani from Kinshasa after the war, in February 2003, 5 years after the river was divided, the UN's special representative described it as an important moment in the physical and geographical reunification of this vast and beautiful country. The barge carried flour, salt, cement, and bicycles. People on the banks who had not seen a supply convoy in 5 years wept. The river had been the weapon. The river was now the peace. In June 2025, Congolese government forces and Rwandan-backed M23 rebels reached a ceasefire agreement in a town on the Congolese border. 2 months later, the ceasefire collapsed. M23 resumed its advance toward Kisangani, toward the river's end, toward the Diamond City, toward the same geography that drew the last army that came for security reasons and stayed for minerals. The Boyoma Falls have not moved. The river is still the only highway. Kisangani is still the hinge. If you have never had the geography of this war explained, not the politics, not the ethnicity, not the international diplomacy, but the physical logic of water and terrain that made everything else inevitable, you won't find it assembled like this anywhere else. Stay close.